Here's how the lockdown affected the drug supply in the UK. On the 23rd of March 2020, the UK entered into a lockdown. Social distancing rules were applied and schools were closed.
From this evening, I must give the British people a very simple instruction. You must stay at home.
Along with that, the pubs and the clubs and the festivals were closed. But how did this affect the drug supply? My name's Simon. I research drug culture and harm reduction. If you want science-backed information, I'm trying to get this channel off the ground. Feel free to like and subscribe. So the initial lockdown in the UK lasted for about 3 months. So one thing we can look to see how this affected the drug supply is this piece of research, which was published in February 2021 by the drugs charity Release. The purpose was to monitor the drug supply during the pandemic, and they interviewed 2,600 people. And what they found was quite interesting. During that initial lockdown between March and May 2020, the supply, quality and price of illegal drugs in the UK remained very stable initially. It was only when the lockdown sort of started to initially ease that the problems started with the drug supply, but we'll get onto that. So if we look at the mid-level drug dealers, the local neighbourhood weed dealers, for instance, or the local neighbourhood coke dealers, they are really the backbone of the British drug supply network. So if we look at the research, the mid-level drug dealers at the time were actually quite confident in their suppliers having stock to last for about 3 months. The research revealed that many drug dealers actually stuck to the government's prescribed pandemic health rules. 2/3 of them were actually still practicing the 2-metre social distancing rules whilst they were swapping cash for the stash. The research revealed that many drug dealers were actually sticking to the pandemic health rules. 2/3 reported that they were observing the 2-metre social distancing rules whilst they were swapping cash for a stash. And they achieved this in a variety of ways. One of them was using dead drops, leaving the drugs in certain locations such as gardens, windowsills, or posting them through letterboxes or chucking them through windows. There was some that even reported that dealers were driving past and just launching the stash out of the car of the window, a drive-by deal, if you will. Over a third, 38%, said that they were wearing gloves at the time. 31% said they were wearing masks. 3 in 10 dealers modified their drug packaging because of the pandemic. Suppliers were double bagging products or using antibacterial solutions on packaging. And 1 in 5 of the dealers in the study reported that they had switched to some sort of cashless payment such as PayPal, debit or crypto. Around this time, there was also a boom in people moving from more traditional ways of buying drugs, like ringing someone up and going meeting them, to sort of online solutions, for instance, using encrypted apps like Telegram or the dark web. 1 in 10 users said that they had bought drugs on the dark web over the lockdown. 13% of them said that the situation had led them to buying drugs on the dark web for the first time. At the start of the lockdown, many presumed that the drugs market would be severely affected by border closures across the globe and by stay-at-home restrictions. But in fact, the majority of respondents in this survey did not report finding a supplier or a desired drug to be more difficult to get hold of compared to before the arrival of the pandemic. That's a quote from Judith Aldridge, the lead author of the study. We did, however, observe increased difficulties in purchasing drugs as the first lockdown was eased. So really, at first, there wasn't many issues, but then in May, things got more tricky. On the 13th of May, the first phased reopening began. By the 1st of June, all pupils were returned to school. So around this time, the supplies from the dealers that they'd stockpiled, the pandemic supplies, started to get a little bit depleted. And EncroChat, which was a supposedly uncrackable mobile messaging network which was used by sort of higher wholesalers of drugs, got infiltrated by the French and Dutch police. That led to a whole tidal wave of busts of dealers. So at that point, the suppliers' stockpiles were starting to reduce. You also had problems with EncroChat busting a lot of the main wholesalers, and then you also had the problems where the pandemic had shut down road haulage, and a lot of the drugs in the UK come from mainland Europe on containers using trucks. Brexit had happened as well, which also did not help with red tape for people getting things into the UK from Europe. And what we started to see at this point was shortages of drugs. Judith Aldridge continued. We did, however, observe difficulties in purchasing drugs as the first lockdown eased and was lifted. This also coincided with reports of increases in prices, which would be consistent with supply shortages starting to have an effect on the market. Our results seem to suggest that suppliers were charging more and in some cases reducing deal sizes rather than sacrificing the purity of the drug they were supplying. And to make matters worse, people reported that they were using more drugs generally during the pandemic, so there was more demand and less supply. In that survey from Release, 43% of people said that their drug use had increased during the lockdown and 21% said it had decreased. Weed, coke and psychedelics were the most popular drugs during the lockdown, according to the research. Tony Saggers, who was the former head of drugs at the National Crime Agency at the time, told the journalist Max Daly, few suppliers along the route will take the risk of holding more than enough to keep the supply fluid. I think the combination of there being less cover for suppliers due to COVID and the EncroChat seizures will have been disruptive and the cause of paranoia for some. Around this time, there was less demand for ecstasy because the clubs and the festivals had shut down. Although there was quite a lot of illegal raves happening at the time, electronic music culture was split. Some people saying it was completely unacceptable to organise, attend or DJ at these raves. They dubbed them plague raves, whilst there was another contingent of people from the electronic music culture that actually thought it was acceptable and as long as they weren't sort of affecting other people, they should be allowed to go to illegal raves.
Police say there were 300 at the illegal rave in an unused railway arch. When the revellers fled, they managed to stop 78 of them and gave them fixed penalty notices. They'll all have to pay £200 fines.
But generally, overall, the demand for ecstasy was right down. And if you look at research from the Loop, the Cardiff University and the University of Liverpool, they tracked the changes in the ecstasy supply between 2019 and 2021. 45% of the ecstasy that they tested in 2021 contained no MDMA at all. Instead, it was containing a lot of caffeine or synthetic caffeinoids like MCA, also known as methadone. If you bought ecstasy last year, there was a 45% chance that there was no MDMA in it at all. That's what I wrote in the Face magazine in 2022. They published their research in the Journal of Drug Science, Policy and Law. The monumental slump in the quality of drugs sold as MDMA was the result of the perfect shitstorm. The nightclubs and festivals were shut due to the pandemic, dramatically reducing the demand and resulting in big-time manufacturers in the Netherlands scaling back their activities. The police operation that shut down EncroChat, which caused dark web wholesalers to sort of go out of business, and Brexit disrupting road haulage, because the majority of ecstasy comes from mainland Europe in shipping containers. And when we got to 2022, however, testing found that the MDMA supply and the drug supplies had completely recovered. Supply from the Netherlands had kicked in again and the ecstasy came back to the previous situation, which was very pure in the UK with no adulterants whatsoever. If we look at the picture as a whole, one thing's for sure, you can see that despite having some ups and downs during this entire process and some of the suppliers and the users having to adapt their process somewhat, perhaps using the dark web or using different sort of methods of receiving or packaging or selling drugs, you can see that one thing's for sure, the underground drug market remains extremely resilient even in the face of unprecedented circumstances. Can I just say, if you got all the way to the end of the video, I deserve a sub.